Well, here we are again. Welcome back. I hope you had a good break, managed to get a sandwich or whatever else. Um, it's been a busy and a good morning, and it kind of wound its way up to a conclusion, which is, well, who's doing the checking, who's checking the checkers, and who, where do the problems get identified? And I think we've got this kind of holistic sense that everybody is involved, and there should be a culture of responsibility across the entire process, from design, concept design, through design development, through production information, through consent, through certification, but right the way out to site and building and those involved in installing. What I think we concluded just before lunch, or I suggested, was increasingly intolerant systems and materials. I say intolerant because when you've got a piece of aluminium cladding, forget the ACM, just aluminium cladding that's been profiled to suit fabricators' drawings, and it arrives on site, well, that's steel flashing. There's not a lot you can do in terms of working that into shape, as the old stonemasons or the joiners or the lead workers used to do. So the products have to be right when they get there. They're coming from increasingly sophisticated production processes for components or systems or complete pods or modules or whatever else it is. But when it gets installed, what about the people who install, and how much do they know about what they're installing, and where's the checking of all of that lot? So that was kind of the wrap up of the morning. And here we are, the second part of the day, the after lunch session, and off we go with identifying and addressing critical problems. And here to speak to us is somebody that I've actually had the privilege of working with very, very closely over an extended period of time, and intensive as well, in the sense of the input. And Mary Sheehan is speaking to us. She was going to be from South America, but she's not travelled there, so she's speaking to us from Ireland. And she's a chartered engineer with over 17 years experience. Mary has extensive experience in the construction industry, managing fire engineering services for major projects across Ireland, the UK, South America, and the Middle East. And she leads engineering teams providing fire safety design and engineering, design reviews, and authorities liaison. And I can testify to that work because I've had her advising me closely. Her technical expertise includes fire life safety code consulting, egress analysis, site supervision, and sign-off. Sign-off, again, back there we are with it. Various project types, and a wide range of building typologies there as well. So I'm going to hand over to Mary. It's a similar sort of arrangement as before. There's the brief introduction, 30-minute presentation with slides, and 15-minute Q&A with Mary. So Mary, the floor is yours. You're very welcome. Lovely to see you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Paul. So my name is Mary Sheehan. I'm a technical director in the Dublin office for Jensen Hughes. I'm going to talk you through identifying and addressing critical problems in new builds. The objectives really, and what I'm going to kind of go through, is to how to ensure the finally constructed building is in line with the design and in compliance with the building regs. I'm going to go through what the new regulations in the UK are post Grenfell, how they compare to regulations in Ireland, and how we can learn from both and maybe improve upon both of them. So I'm going to walk through a very short slide about myself, then I'll go through the standards for the UK since Grenfell, in Ireland since 2014. The reason we picked 2014 is we had our own number of defects in residential developments in Ireland that came to light in 2013, I think, which then brought in some amendments to our regulations. So that's why that's the date that I've picked in Ireland. So in the UK, the government have brought in the Building Safety Act. There have been updates to approved document B, and there's obviously more updates coming in December. The BS 791 is currently being updated. We then have the insurance and mortgage led form of the EWS 1 form. Then I'm going to bring you through the Irish regs. So we've had an update to Technical Guidance Document B. That is, I don't know why that's flicked on there. How do I go back? Yeah, sorry. So we've had an update to that, to our Technical Guidance Document B. That is basically our ADB, except for there's a few slight differences throughout. And then I'll go through our Building Control Amendment Regulations in 2014 as well. So a quick bit about me. I'm a chartered engineer, as Paul was saying, with over 17 years postgraduate experience. I worked in the UK from 2008, and I still do today, working on various uses from infrastructure projects, residential towers, you name it, and I've probably worked on it. I've done the same in Ireland, in the Middle East, and I also worked in Rio on their metro for the Olympics. In Ireland, since 2014, there's been a change with regard to the roles and responsibilities of fire consultants, which I'll go through in the next few slides, which means that on projects in Ireland, you go from the preliminary stage through construction, including site inspections, and you have to sign off on compliance. So as we all know, Grenfell happened on the 14th of June 2017 with 72 fatalities. As a result of that, the Hackett Review came out, and I'm not going to go through all of these slides, but it's just really, there's a number of main things that came out from it due to, lack of competencies, ignorance, indifference, and so forth. And that's kind of led us to where we are now. So we have, the first thing I'm going to go through is the Building Safety Act. The scope of this is to do with residential high-rise buildings. These are residential buildings with a top story more than 18 metres or 7 stories high, and it applies to new and existing buildings. How it works is there's a new regulatory process, distinct decision points and gateways that have to be met. It is there to promote competence from a top-down perspective, provide oversight for all buildings focused on evidence, where we get then the golden thread, expanded roles and accountable persons, and mandatory reporting of fire and structural safety occurrences. It was granted royal assent in April 2022. Now, Gateway 1 is with us now, and Gateway 1 deals with the planning stage, and that is to do with the introduction of fire statements within the planning stage, just to ensure that fire safety has been considered at that stage. Gateway 2 and 3 are likely towards the end of 2023. And Gateway 2 it's before construction can commence. Clients have to submit a building control approval application to the regulator. This includes arrangements to capture and maintain the golden thread information. Now, the regulator has so far kind of spoken about, my slides are flipping, sorry, has spoken about a 12-week period to approve reject that application. And then Gateway 3 is after construction, which is to provide assurance that the building is safe for occupation, and you'll get a completion certificate, from the regulator at that stage. I think it's kind of interesting to kind of note that the building safety regulator will oversee the building works for high-rise buildings. They'll work closely, obviously, with the local authority, the fire and rescue authority, and bring in external experts as necessary. I think it's an interesting point that, the way the gateways are set up, it's a very yes, no, you can move on from this gateway. And the regulator themselves are taking on a lot of commitments to meet that. And I'm not sure if they're not kind of setting up a serious pinch point within the actual construction itself. I don't understand why there hasn't been a continuation of the fire safety consultants who have already been part of the gateway, the planning, the fire strategy, and they really have a very good understanding of the intent of the fire strategy. I don't understand how they haven't been kind of pulled along within this kind of process. So the new building regulator, they will implement the new framework. They will oversee the safety and standards of the building. The statutory committee for the planning applications, the enforcement capabilities. They will become the building control authority for high-rise buildings, and they will oversee building control bodies and their professionals. And if we look then at approved document B, I mean, there's been a number of changes since Grenfell has happened in, that should say, obviously 2019. There has been changes to the language and content just to clarify the recommendations, not the requirements, because they are the same as they always were, but the recommendations within ADB. Provide guidance on the design of the sprinklers are included in an appendix, and they've also provided further guidance on external stairs. They've moved appendices from back in the appendices information there into the body of the report so that it doesn't appear as though they are just a tack on to the approved document B. And then in 2020, there has been a reduction in the trigger height for sprinklers in blocks of flats from 30 metres to 11 metres. And there's also been an introduction of wayfinding signage for the fire services. In 2022, in December of this year, there'll be further changes, and that is a ban on combustible materials in and on external walls of buildings with a story of 11 metres or more in height. There'll be an introduction of secure information boxes, evacuation alert systems, and there's also going to be clarification and corrections. That's just to do with diagrams, text clarifications, and that kind of thing. Other litigation and standards that have come in, we've got the London Plan, which now requires evacuation lifts, and there's an emphasis on the highest possible safety standards. What that means will be interesting and will kind of come out throughout time, really, because the building regulations and approved document B and the other standards are there to set the minimum required for a building. To add language as to the highest possible safety standards when you're dealing with a contractor and a client that's trying to achieve a constructed building, I think it'll just be interesting to see how that all kind of pans out. Then we also have the draft Treble 91, which will now require 2 stairs in a building over 18 metres or pressurisation, evacuation lifts and lobbies, and evacuation lifts lobbies being protected from smoke ingress. Again, I've written here the significant issues. I don't actually think that that is going to be the case. I think with everything that around change, people are always a bit kind of slow to take it on board. Whereas, you know, between the fire consultants and the M&Es, we should be able to make that work. It was released earlier this year, but it's been delayed due to the extent of public comment. So that's likely to be out in March 2023. It's just a quick sketch to kind of look at what the differences really are from then and now. So within the first one there, we have any height building with a single stair, with a single firefighting shaft. Obviously, you can see it there with the lift. And then once we go over 18 metres, we'll need 2 stairs, 2 evacuation lifts and a firefighting lift. Then we also have the EWS 1 form. I find these quite an interesting addition because they're not a building regulations requirement. They've been requested by mortgage lenders in order to lend on apartments. They're only intended for buildings over 18 metres in height or where particular concern. And it isn't required for new builds, but because of the way that the lenders have set it up, they've now insisted on it, which means that it's now become part, what we've seen is it's now part of an employer's requirement for all new builds to ensure that they can happily lend money towards it. So kind of a summary on where I found with the UK standards is that there's an emphasis on the design stage and standards, the roadmap as to where we're going to get to, competencies, and also ongoing maintenance. But again, I'm kind of back to, well, what about the monitoring at the construction stage? having one regulator having to do all of the inspections on all of the various sites for high-rise buildings, how is that going to work? How is the construction industry going to continue moving? And why haven't we continued to bring along competent fire consultants along the way? As the last note says there, as I've already emphasised, the EWS1 form, really, that's just putting an emphasis on inspections from the industry rather than from the government. Our technical guidance document B, that Irish standard, that has been updated in line with approved document B, and it deals with tall and complex buildings. It deals with open plan flats. It updates that. It updates protected corridors and lobbies. It updates domestic sprinkler systems, and there's an update to firefighting shafts, which is actually different to approved document B. We're moving away from having the stairs, the lift 7.5 meters away, and the lobby, the common corridor, when used as the firefighting lobby. In Ireland now, we'll have the stairs, the lift, and the lobby as a firefighting shaft, and then the common corridor. Yes, so with regard to the new kind of BCAR system, well, I say new, 2014, it was following a number of high profile projects which highlighted shortcuts in the construction industry. It was mainly, again, to do with residential blocks. Now, the government introduced and amended regulations to try and improve the standard of construction and compliance. Now, we now have new roles and responsibilities. So we have at the top, we have an assigned certifier, and their role during the construction phase is to they're appointed by the building owner to develop the inspection plans, coordinate inspections, and to certify compliance with the building. Then under them, there's going to be a suite of ancillary certifiers. That includes fire engineers, M&Es, access, and all the ones. So I would say the assigned certifiers are generally the architects, and then you have the engineers then underneath them. Each of the ancillary certifiers have to have their own PI insurance to cover the works that they are signing off. And signing off on any of this, you have to be either a principal or the director of the company. So the fire consultants, as I was saying, have now become ancillary certifiers, which include inspection roles. What has also happened within this is they have removed kind of vague wording. So within the compliance, the opinion on compliance that we had to provide before 2014, it would state things like substantial compliance with Part B. They've removed any woolly words with regard to that. It is now to do with it complies with Part B of the building regulations. We have also introduced a way of monitoring and managing the information. So obviously with the system that has come in the UK, you have to look after ensure that you have all the paperwork correct, and all that kind of stuff, and that all fills into the golden thread. We have a different type of idea, which is the building control management system, where all of our information is put up there, and it's a online management system, and it's managed and monitored by the local authority, which it seems to be similar to the I have no idea why that keeps flicking, sorry about that, to the role of the fire safety regulator, only ours applies to all buildings. We haven't just stuck to high-rise residential or high-risk buildings. We have this throughout all buildings and new builds. Our local authority has more of a monitoring role, so the fire consultant will be going out and doing inspections at the various stages and benchmarks, and they will do the final sign-off, and our building control monitor. So they go to site to ensure that things are being undertaken correctly. So what does that mean for fire consultants in Ireland? As I was saying, the role now includes ancillary certifier role. We have to provide a cert at the start before construction to state that the design complies with the second schedule of the building regulations. I don't know why that's doing that, sorry about that. And that's to show that it complies with Part B of the building regs. We have to undertake an inspection plan, ensuring that we have the key stages will be inspected. That's all of the benchmarks. So we're talking about when the external walls are going up, the cavity barriers, fire stopping coming through the um, the firewall, the external walls, the fire stopping in the common areas within the protected entrance halls. So we have benchmarks for all of those, which helps the QA on site with the contractors. So you will be calling out, this hasn't been fitted correctly, and a contractor's representative will be there to ensure that what you've picked up has been picked up throughout. So you're there for all the benchmarks, and then after that, then you will be there for inspections throughout as well to ensure that everything is as compliant as can be. You're never going to see 100% of the building. That is obviously a shortcoming of it, but at least there are the benchmarks and the sporadic inspections. You also have to produce inspection reports. You have to review and sign off on all products that are going in the building, obviously only with regard to Part B. And then you have two certs at the end. One is an inspection certificate to say that you have inspected throughout the construction. You specify the dates that you've inspected. And then you have a completion report certificate as well, again, to say that the building as constructed is in compliance with Part B of the building regs. Obviously, no system is absolutely perfect, but this allows for an awful lot of benchmarking. The fire consultant who has been been totally involved in the fire strategy or the fire certificate in Ireland throughout the entire stages, who's well aware of what's going on, can do all of the regular inspections. It can keep the construction continuing, but also then allow the Building Control Authority to have inspections themselves. And what can we learn from both? I would find the UK do very, very well is the management side of buildings. In Ireland, we have an awful lot of people who own property but don't necessarily know how to manage it. I know from an Irish perspective, it's the local fire authority do not like using 9999 because Irish owners don't necessarily know what the management responsibilities are. So I think Ireland could learn more from the implementation of the ongoing maintenance requirements and the roles and responsibilities of the building owners. And obviously, not obviously, but we now have a move from high-rise to more high-rise developments in Ireland. So that's in Dublin and in Cork. So obviously we're going to have to implement the learning and the design standards that have been introduced that we've spoken through there from Grenfell. And what I've kind of found with regard to the UK is that they could learn a bit from what Ireland does very well, which is, we have competent fire consultants. Get them involved, make it their responsibility that they have to be insured and they have to sign off on the buildings as constructed to Technical Guidance Document B or the building regs. And that therefore that kind of keeps the construction industry going. It allows the Building Control Authority to monitor and have management of the system. And you have to provide all of those certifications before the building can be occupied. So I think that perhaps there is a bit of a learning within that for the UK. And that, any questions from yourself, Paul?
Well, look at that. I asked Mary if she could be sure to finish on time, and Mary, you're 7 seconds over. So that's about as good as it gets. Well done. Look, we've got, I don't know whether you know the format, Mary, but we've got questions rolling in and we've got a chat line going as well. So I'm not looking at the chat line because it's a bit of it's very interesting, but I haven't got the time as I'm dealing with the questions. But there's a very interesting chat dialogue going on, I'm assured, by others that are in this studio with me. But also the questions are rolling in. And I'm going to just shape a few of those up now in the 15 minutes that we've got. But the talking points around this one are how to ensure the final constructed building is in line with the design and in compliance with the building regulations. And that really takes us on from this morning very well. What are the new regulations in the UK post-Grenfell, and how do these regulations compare to Ireland? What can we learn from both? Well, we've touched on the latter of those two questions, but the first one is very important. But let me just turn straight to one of the questions that's come in. And I think I'm going to dive in with this one. I was going to leave it till later because it opens a Pandora's box, but let's go with it. It's Andrew Fern again. He has a question this morning. And he says, do you feel, Mary, that the design and build procurement route in its current form, so there's indicating that change may be needed or is coming, do you feel that the design and build procurement route is compatible with the Building Safety Act? And I think what's behind that one is that the Building Safety Act places stringent demands on all involved in the process of delivering buildings of a certain level of complexity and scale and size, etc. And I think what's behind Andrew Fern's question, and it's sort of hardly for me to interpret his question, but what's behind it is, do we have the level of professionalism within design and build as a procurement that can actually deliver the kind of controlled response to the agenda that faces? Or, as some people would say, I'm not saying me, but some people would say, is design and build a race to the bottom because it's competitive tendering in its worst form and transfer of risk and responsibility to those perhaps not best equipped to deal with it and in circumstances of great pressure? Now, many would speak against what I just said there, but there's the question.
Yeah, and I think that is what Andrew's trying to get with the question, all right. And I think there is an aspect of a race to the bottom with that in the past. But I do think that, you know, a tragedy like Grenfell, or even if you just engage your brain and think about the impact that if an apartment block isn't built correctly, there's people living there, it's their lives, it's their homes. And if you take it back to that level and understand your responsibility as a professional, and you know, you have to ignore all of the contractors. I mean, I know from an Irish perspective, we have actually got a good bit of leeway. Not leeway. We have a good bit of we can push back on the contractors quite a bit because they cannot hand over their building unless we provide sign off. They have to provide us with all of the documentation that we ask for and in the form that we want it, including various product data sheets, you know, simple things like if they're out of date, we want them updated, stuff that's very simple like that. But we can have a good pull on that because we're the ones that have to sign it off. At the end of the day, if something goes wrong in Ireland, or I would say in the UK, it might end up getting to this stage, and it has obviously with Grenfell, you're just going to end up in court. I mean, if we can all just kind of bring ourselves to that level, and I think perhaps there is the institutes, i.e. the Engineers Ireland, let's say, or the IFE, really have a responsibility to ensure that whoever that they are providing chartership for are actually meeting those requirements as well. I think there's a whole kind of full circle with it as to professionals need to know what they're supposed to be doing and the responsibility that they hold in regard to what they're doing, but also the institutions that are there have to also hold them accountable at the same stage.
Well, let's just probe that a little bit further. We're going to come on to other issues, but a lot of people poo-poo the comment I make when I talk about design and build in relation to aeroplanes, cars and ships. And I know that we've got somebody known to both you and I listening in today, Professor James Ligate up in Edinburgh, I think. And he's not only an expert on fire in construction for buildings, but he also is heavily involved in shipping. So shipping, cars and aeroplanes. I drop on those because actually two of them at least, ships and aeroplanes, are heavily involved in design and build. Boeing are a design and build company. They design their airplanes and they build them. European Airbus are a design and build airplane. The wings are made, I think, in Wales, of all places, for many of the European Airbus, the smaller ones. So they are design and build companies. They get their seats from, they get all sorts of components from all sorts of places, and they bring them together, right from the instrumentation to... Now, you think of an aeroplane, a decent-sized aeroplane weighs about 350 tons. It sets off down the runway, and as it moves into the air, it's carrying 10% of its load as fuel, 35 tons of fuel. Off it goes and flies across London on the way east to Russia if it goes that way, and over Russia to China. It's passing across very large cities, and it's landing on another strip of runway 2 miles long somewhere else with incredible precision. You wouldn't get on a plane if it was designed and built in the way we do the construction industry. I, for one, do not have anything against design and build. Nothing at all. I think design and build should deliver just as good a quality as any traditional procurement route. But it does seem to me that in the construction industry, we haven't run design and build as we should have run it. Let me leave that with you as a start of a discussion.
Yeah. I agree with you on that, and I think we can absolutely learn from what has happened before. But I do think that, you know, what the Act is trying to achieve with regard to gateways is very positive. And I'd say there's still going to be learnings from it. I mean, even the introduction of the fire statement at planning stage was a very kind of, you know, very straightforward statement to fill out. At least it is ensuring that fire safety is being engaged, that the architects are engaging with fire consultants at a very, very early age, or early time. Because I do remember my first while working in the UK, and sometimes the same as Ireland, it's just a tick, it's used more, fire consultants were more used as a tick box exercise, whereas now it really has come obviously to the forefront of everyone's mind what responsibilities there are with regard to fire consultancy. And I do think that, I think you're right, there beforehand there was probably, as I say, in a tick box exercise, but I do feel like the Act is allowing for a move forward within the industry. And I think the gateways are a right idea. I just think that perhaps there's some work that needs to be done with regard to that to ensure that the construction industry can kind of continue moving forward without,
Okay.
you know,
So
correctly. All right, yeah.
if we roll on, because we've got a few minutes left, I think that
Yeah.
I would argue that design and build is a procurement route. It's just got to be done right and better. For those who
Correct,
aren't
yeah.
doing it as they should at the moment, many are doing it well, I get that. But Matthew Locke, will the BSR have, and this is a kind of quick answer, will the BSR have the statutory authority to enforce? The HSE Health and Safety Executive has no statutory authority to enforce CDM regulations unless there is a fatality or a severe injury. So what authority do the BSR have? Can you give a quick answer on that? Because I've got other questions.
They have enforcement. I'm not sure exactly what the enforcements are, but they have got enforcement capabilities, yeah.
Okay, well, here's one from Ruxanda Palkutatulia, if I've pronounced that properly, forgive me if not. And I don't think we can go into this in detail, but I think it gives us a good insight into the problems. She says, could anyone please advise if timber cladding can be treated to better than Class B S3D2 as required in ADB Volume 1 related to unprotected areas so can be not counted towards the unprotected areas? Many thanks. Now, I don't want to get involved in the detail of that, but I think the principle of it is really very important, which is that that's just looking at timber cladding. Can you tell us something about the importance of looking at the walling as a whole, particularly, for example, if you've got timber cladding on top of a polymeric insulation? So you've got combustible cladding on combustible insulation. How can we look at independent components in the wall, or must we always look at the wall as a whole? That's my question.
No, we must look at the wall as a whole. There are testing procedures available for looking at unless all of the components are non-combustible, well then you have that's fine in itself. But if you are introducing anything that is not non-combustible, you need to look at the system as a whole, and there's testing there that can be undertaken for that.
Okay, but key to Ruxanda's point here is that the ADB might not be set up correctly if it's talking about independent components as opposed to the system as a whole, because you would think in reading ADB2 that you could satisfy a whole series. For example, paragraph 12.7, limited combustibility of insulation. Boom, that's done. Then you look at 12.6, external wall surface spread of flame. Deal with that. And so ADB guides you the wrong way, doesn't it?
It does. You're correct. It does. It does. And I think there is some clarity that should be provided with regard to that. And maybe that might come out in the December 22 version that is coming. I'm not sure if it is, but you are correct. You can't, and I think that is a problem that has happened in the past, is that you look at one paragraph on its own and not at the system itself.
Right, well, I thank very much Ruxandra for that. We've got a couple of minutes left, and two that I'm going to roll together. Does full photo audit by the installer offer some kind of surety? I've been having that argument over lunch. I don't think it does. I think you need to get the people to do the work right in the first place. However, documented photographs might make people do things better if they knew it's going to be recorded. But we go to Bjorn, that was Ian Lowe, we go to Bjorn Calendar.
Can I talk to that point there, Paul?
Yeah.
Sorry, just to talk to that point. I know what we do in Ireland, as I was saying, we go to benchmarks is our first protocol. So we have a benchmark, let's say, for the cavity barriers. They need to be installed like this in compression, etc., etc., etc. And we sign off and say that has been installed correctly. We also do kind of inspections throughout, and we ask the contractor to confirm that he has checked them. And then we do ask for photographic evidence of the remaining that has been installed, especially with fire stopping in protected entrance halls. So I think if you have the basis of what you expect set out and agreed, then I think photographic evidence is a good addition to that.
Right. I like to see it as a threat to people, i.e. Big Brother's watching you and you better watch that you get it right, because we can track it back anywhere down the line. Bit like Volvo cars used to know which gang was building the car, because cars were built by teams, and if something was wrong they could track it back to the team as opposed to a production line assembly, which takes us from Volvo cars to Bjorn Calendar. I don't know whether he's calling from the UK or one of Nordic countries, but he asks, and this will be the last question, how can industrial building impact the fire safety and quality control in the UK? These industries do work with design and build. So basically I think it's, can we expect better quality products from industrial processes? And if so, how do we make sure they're right when they get into the building? Boom.
Yeah, and I think that is a problem that probably, as I kind of alluded to in my presentation, I feel like what has been brought out with the Act should be actually across all building uses and not necessarily just high-rise. What I would say about specific industries especially, they actually have higher requirements than the building regs. So I know on a few industrial buildings that I'm working on, they require themselves from an insurance perspective, sprinklers, a higher detection level, etc. So generally they actually come, when they're built, they're actually above what is required for the building regs.
Well,
but I think
we've
again,
got a very...
sorry.
No, go on, you finish.
No, I think though that it's all around inspections and ensuring that all the benchmarks are met and things are agreed on site that they're expected to look like this. I think it's all down to expectation.
We've got a very strict and efficient team here who manage me, because my questions that are coming in from people have gone down off the screen. There were two others that I was going to just make reference to, but they've gone, so because we've got to keep on time. But it's been a fascinating session with you again. Thank you very much for this contribution. It really complemented Mr. Barnshaw's of earlier very well indeed. I think we could talk for a long, long time, but I've got to move on.
Good.
So thank you, Mary.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you very much.